In chapter 1120, starts in an unexpected place with a conversation between two old men who are shown as young men. It's really interesting to see more of Punk Hazard before Caesar's weapon and before Sakazuki and Kuzen's devastating duel. Originally, it looked a lot like Egghead Island or a test version of it. For some reason, Vega Punk seems to really like the high-tech tropical palm tree look. But seeing Professor Clover on Punk Hazard is really surprising. It's strange to see a society focused on ancient history on an island focused on future technology. It was a good reminder that Clover was impressive in his younger days, as an adventurous explorer sailing around the world to uncover its secrets. Since he's on Punk Hazard, it's important to note how hard it is to get there because it's in the New World. Remembering that Clover is neither a pirate nor with the world government, it's impressive that this archaeologist made it so far. I found his extended backstory quite tragic. To discuss that, we first need to address the shocking revelation that Clover also bears the will of D. This adds a new layer to his passion for uncovering the Void Century because it directly affects him and his brother, who was killed when it was discovered he had the middle initial D. It's heartbreaking that Clover not only had to watch this happen, but also had to deny his brother in order to survive. The whole thing reminds me of Belmare and how she insisted Nami and Nohiko were her children, even at the cost of her life. But there's something I don't quite get here. Clover makes a very emotional plea to Vega Punk, implying there's prejudice against those with the will of D, but that's not really been consistent in One Piece. One of my biggest "this doesn't make sense" points has always been how the world government let a man named Monkey D. Luffy run wild for so long, despite the fact that they know he's a D clan member and he's not just any D, he's a Monkey D, like Garp and Dragon, whose names they also know. The moment Luffy received his first bounty, an admiral should have been sent to take him down. But it seems the purge policy stopped at some point. This was a big issue during Clover's time, with a big hunt for those with the will of D. Maybe the world government thought they got rid of them all, except for the ones who joined the world government. The few D wielders who did appear later, like Roger and Rox, were already in powerful positions by the time the world government noticed them. So while I feel Clover's pain, it contradicts what we've seen in One Piece so far. In fact, it's quite the opposite. At least in modern times, the world government has been strangely tolerant of those with the will of D. They were going to make Garp a Marine Admiral and even let a man named Marshal D. Teach become a warlord of the sea. Something I love is the conclusion of this flashback, where Vega Punk takes on Clover's inherited will by preserving and furthering his work, which I imagine will be passed on to Robin and Elbaf. Vega Punk was essentially keeping the inherited will chair warm for her. In the modern day, there's a difficult panel of Robin lamenting because Vega Punk doesn't outright say who he's talking about, but Robin recognizes Clover's words. This is a play on Olivia's last words to Robin, where she said they were trying to retrieve and protect the voices of the past, a big concept on O'Hara. This concept fits well with this chapter, especially since we also have Emmeth, who is literally a voice from the past. I love how this whole arc ties together thematically because it represents the goal of One Piece as a whole. It seems likely that the future of this world holds a return to the past through the dawn of the world. It's brilliant that all this information comes in an arc centered on a man who is said to be 500 years ahead of the world and another man who is being rapidly erased from existence. With that, we should probably talk about Atlas. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone because from the moment Atlas left the relative safety of the Thousand Sunny, her sacrifice was almost certain. The first thing I thought of was that moment in Dragon Ball Z where Goku tells Gohan to take care of his mother and then sacrifices himself to kill Cell. The panel of Atlas looking back at the same angle and saying take care of Lilith is very similar. And like Cell, no Shuro doesn't die. It also reminds me of Pedro, who blew himself up to allow the Thousand Sunny to escape. They believe that explosion gave the Thousand Sunny the extra push it needed to get into the water. I do need to ask this question. Was Atlas planning to blow herself up regardless of whether Ethan was there? They got away without his interference, and the Sunny still wasn't going to make it until Atlas self-destructed. So I think that even if Ethan wasn't there, Atlas was probably planning on blowing herself up anyway. In One Piece, this is usually where we start discussing whether or not a character is really dead, but in this case, I feel pretty certain. It's because of her final panel where she's smiling right before death, as if she has the will of D, and in a way, she does. We talked earlier about how Vega Punk took on Clover's inherited will, and Clover was a D, so this is Atlas, as part of Vega Punk, doing her part to fulfill that will. I think that smile is a key element, which was missing from the deaths of Izo and Ashura Doji, providing a sense of finality. Now, the last surviving Vega Punks are evil and greed, creating a bleak outlook for the world, but one that is masterfully crafted. York represents greed, aligning with the world government and the world noble's main driving force. On the other side, evil represents what the world nobles label our heroes, the will of D, as demons and evil enemies of the gods. So it's fitting that the aspect of evil is the one to oppose them. At the end of the chapter, York collapses into laughter, thinking she is the last remaining Vega Punk, which isn't something the smartest person in the world would ever think. She must know about what Atlas did to Lilith to disconnect her, but this might just be the folly of greed. York is so satisfied with the idea of having Punk records all to herself and being the only Vega Punk that she's not thinking straight, lost in her pure greed. I really appreciated Jinbe in this section because he's the Strahd whose dynamic with the rest of the crew is still not fully established. Here he takes command, which is great. In this group dynamic, he should theoretically defer to Zoro or Nami, as she's the navigator when everyone's aboard the Sunny, but Jinbe's past experience as a captain kicks in, and he doesn't hesitate to make necessary decisions. It's good to see his wisdom and experience benefiting the crew. The established hierarchy is still there, though, as Jinbe makes the first decision, but then Zoro shouts the order and Brook obeys him. This shows some very nice Zoro-Jinbe synergy happening. Finally, we have an actual conversation between Luffy and Emeth, who calls Luffy Joy Boy. Emeth doesn't say something like, there you are, the man who inherited Joy Boy's will. Instead, he goes, yo, Joy Boy, great to see you again. Joy Boy is now within Luffy. Luffy tells Dory and Broggy that Emeth says he's going to protect Joy Boy, but they don't necessarily know who or what Joy Boy is. They know the name Sun God Nika instead. So we have a situation where Luffy, the Giants, and Emeth are kind of referring to the same person, but also not, since they're three separate entities as presented to us. They're all referring to the same general concept, but each group thinks they're talking about different people. Something adorable about this scene is when Emeth sees that Luffy doesn't realize he's talking about him. Emeth performs a classic man's eye comedy backhand, which is less obvious because he's a robot. This action is called a tsukomi, meaning retort. It's used to call out something silly said by another character, with one of the most common tsukomi gestures being a forehand or backhand slap. It can also involve more over-the-top actions like throwing objects and engaging in exaggerated, funny violence. This is an important moment for Emeth that might get lost in translation in the West. It shows that Emeth has a strong personality and a knack for comic timing. He's not just a big, sad robot programmed to be serious and efficient. He's a living being, and part of the humor comes from his over-the-top comic gesture, while his facial expression remains unchanged because it can't. Emeth will have trouble pulling off this comic timing if the five elders keep removing his arms. Emeth has another funny moment where it looks like he's about to fire a Frankie-style strong right or weapons left, but it doesn't work because his systems have degraded over the past few hundred years. There's a close-up of Emmeth's face with the best expression he can manage as a robot. It's fantastic, and I'm a bit sad that we're only now getting to see this side of Emeth. It seems we're moments away from his demise just as he's starting to showcase his personality. We might have a little more time with him, but not much, because the Egghead Island arc is almost over. On that note, I wanted to highlight a piece of news you may have missed. Oda's editor stated a few days ago that Egghead Island would conclude with a major incident. It feels like we've reached the end of all the big twists and reveals this arc has to offer, but apparently there's one more massive event to look forward to, possibly related to Vega Punk's ongoing message. This message has taken 5 months to unfold, and while Vega Punk didn't drop any bombshells in this chapter, he did make an important revelation. He used Roger's true name, Goldie Roger. Most people know him as Gold Roger because the world government has been careful to hide his middle initial, D. Even when Sengoku announced to the world that Ace was Roger's son, he used the name Gold Roger. This revelation is mind-blowing to people around the world, as they now make connections between Goldie Roger, Dragon, Blackbeard, and Luffy.